So what's up guys, the Anime Titan here, back at it again with another What If, and today I'll be doing What If Deku Had a Sound Quirk Part 7. So anyway, last time we left off was with a little incident with Shigaraki and the rest of the gang, but other than that, nothing much. So they would all head home and their parents would question them, asking if they were alright after what had happened with Shigaraki. The kids would all say that, yeah, they're perfectly fine and that nothing actually happened. It was one of their classmates that had been targeted by Shigaraki. This would have made the parents worry a little bit, but nonetheless they'd accept it. Izuku's mother, however, would have been completely and utterly fearful. She would have wondered why this was happening to her little baby of all people. And personally, I would too. But anyway, Izuku would explain that Shigaraki just wanted to ask him a question, and that he answered truthfully, thus having Shigaraki leave him be. Inko would have been at least satisfied with the answer, and would have accepted it. So anyway, the next day would roll around, and the kids would finish packing their stuff and head off to school. After they'd get there, they'd hear Mr. Aizawa speaking to one of the teachers, but they would choose not to pry on the conversation. They'd all wait, and Mr. Aizawa would then round the corner. As he'd round the corner, he'd tell them, "Morning class, today we'll be heading off to the training camp. So hurry up and board the bus. After that, we're gonna have to get going." They'd all board the bus and put away their luggage, and you would expect that it would take them much less time. But anyway, they would board the bus, pack away their luggage, and they'd be going. About half an hour into the trip, Aizawa would hear Mineta squealing in the back. He would have tuned his ears a bit more to see exactly what was happening, and would hear that Mineta's yelling, "Please, please, Aizawa-sensei, could you pull over the bus? I need to take a leak, Aizawa-sensei. I can't hold it anymore. Please, Aizawa-sensei." And Aizawa would ignore it and continue driving. Mineta would continue holding for another 20 minutes before they'd reach a cliff, and Mineta would be the first off of the bus. He'd sprint straight towards one of the bushes to relieve himself without even noticing that there was a car. The rest of the kids would get off of the bus and be intrigued, wondering what this car was and why it was here. They'd all start stretching, however, and that's when one of the Wild Wild Pussycats would take their step off. It would be Mandalay, and if I remember correctly, give me a second. I think it was Pixie Bob. So anyway, the two of them, along with Koda, would be standing, and everybody would be wondering what was going on, when out of nowhere, a earthquake would happen. The students would all be falling except for three of them. That would be Izuku Midoriya, Bakugo Katsuki, and Shoto Todoroki. The three would have quickly used their quirks to maneuver around in the air, with Izuku giving off small bursts to ensure that he doesn't hit the ground, Bakugo using explosions to descend slowly, and Shoto just sliding on ice. The Wild Pussycats, being Mandalay and Pixie Bob, would have been intrigued and would quite well be interested. Mandalay specifically being interested in the boys. Those three boys, to be specific. So anyway, they'd land, and Izuku and the rest, Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki would all land seconds after the rest, having a much softer landing. A bunch of the girls and boys would be kind of pissed that they didn't even try to help them, but would understand that there's only a certain limit to how much they can carry. So anyway, this is when out of nowhere a giant stone beast would sprint at them, and the first to take it out this time would be Ira. He'd quickly rush in, kicking straight through the beast's head, as he'd say that there's most likely more where these came from. They'd all look up to see Aizawa, as he would then begin yelling, "You guys have a couple of hours to make it across the forest to the training camp, or else there's no dinner. Izuku and the rest of the class would be quite annoyed, as they would quickly gather up. They'd wonder what they would be doing, as Izuku would come up with a plan. Okay, first things first, let's have all long-range fighters in the center, with the close to mid-range fighters on the outside. The long-range fighters will support from the inner circle, while the close-range fighters would charge out to ensure that the beasts don't get near the long-range fighters. Do I make myself clear? Everybody would nod as Izuku and the rest of them would take up a mid-range and then on the inner circle a long-range fighting formation. They'd be sprinting through the forest with taking down beasts with ease, as Izuku would then decide that he needs somebody to tell them exactly where the training camp is. He'd then quickly send up Bakugo, who would nonetheless launch himself into the air with a massive explosion high above the treetops. He'd scan quickly as he'd see that inevitably it is southwest from their current location. Izuku would nod as he'd position himself southwest and tell the class, "Come on, we're going that way." The class would quickly follow, taking down many more beasts, and would quickly make it to the training camp in less than 2 hours. 1 hour and 45 minutes to be exact. They'd make it there, and this would actually surprise Mandalay, Pixie Bob, and Koda. Well, Koda wouldn't really care, but it would surprise him nonetheless that they'd make it across the forest so quickly. Izuku would be the first to speak up, saying, "You're gonna get it, Aizawa-sensei," as he, Bakugo, Shoto, and a bunch of the boys would charge straight at Aizawa. Aizawa would quickly use his quirk to erase their quirks. Like, bruh. He would use their quirk to erase their quirks, and they would all decide that it doesn't matter. Izuku would be the first, as he'd slip through Aizawa's guard, grabbing onto the man, ensuring that he couldn't use his hands. That's when, out of nowhere, he'd make Aizawa blink by shaking him fiercely. Aizawa would blink and Bakugo would smile, seeing as Izuku had done it. Bakugo would then quickly sprint closer to Aizawa as he'd point his hands to the ground and cause a bunch of massive explosions, making a large hole. This would interest Aizawa, wondering what the hell they were doing, as Izuku would then drop Aizawa into the hole, Aizawa being just tall enough for his head to stick out. That's when Shoto would out of nowhere quickly freeze Aizawa in, ensuring that Aizawa couldn't go anywhere and that his head was just stuck above the ground. Aizawa would be extremely annoyed, as Izuku and the rest of the boys would smile victoriously. Mandalay would be chuckling at this, seeing as it's not something that she would have expected from the students, much less Aizawa, and Pixie Bob would have been, looking at the three main powerhouses of the classroom, being Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki, with lustful eyes. Izuku would then notice Koda as he'd slowly walk over and say, "Hey, I'm Izuku, what's your name?" Koda would then go to punch Izuku in the family jewels, but Izuku would swiftly avoid it, saying, "Not cool, man. Do you know how much that would have hurt? That is not cool." Mandalay would then step in, saying, "Oh, please excuse Koda. He doesn't really like heroes." Izuku would nod, saying, "I understand then," as he'd look at Koda, ruffle his hair, and then walk off. Koda wouldn't have expected that Izuku would act that way, but nonetheless would have, just stormed off to his secret hideout, dead end. But anyway, Koda would have gone, and Izuku would have just been, how can I put it? Izuku would have just been cooking along with the rest of the class. No, they wouldn't be cooking. They would have enjoyed the meal no, they would be cooking. They came early, which means Mandalay, Pixie Bob, Tiger, and the other chick, I think Ragdoll. Was it Ragdoll? Can't remember. But anyway, they would have had to cook the food, but they're early now, so they don't have to cook the food. Okay, so when Izuku and the rest of the class would be cooking their food with the ingredients given to them by Mandalay and Pixie Bob. They would all quickly start making dishes, with Izuku and Shoto being head. Izuku would have had a bunch of pots lined up in a, just in line above the fire, as he'd tell the people how much ingredients to add, how much this, how much that, basically how to make a really good curry. The students would nod as they would all continue and help Izuku make the curry, with Izuku testing every single pot, ensuring that everything was doing well. As soon as everything had finished, Izuku would nod as he'd say, "Good job." The rest of the class would be pretty happy at this, as they would end up enjoying the meal that had been so gracefully given to them. Well, not given to them, but made by them for them. So anyway, they would smile as they'd enjoy the meal, and then they'd head off to the bathhouse for the night. Mineta would this time actually try to scale the wall, and he would fail yet again, but not in the same way as Canon. Koda would have still scared Mineta, but Mineta would have fallen backwards, and Izuku would have used his sonic wave to catch Mineta. Koda would then, yet again, still look over the wall and still be flustered. He'd then fall off himself, as he would have been, well, KO'd from blood loss. We all know the decent anime, "Oh no, it's happening. Yeet blood from the nose, let's KO." Yeah, that. It would have happened and Koda would have been falling. But this time Izuku would have jumped out of the water using a sound wave to distort the water, ensuring that he wouldn't be slowed down, as he would quickly make his way to where Koda was falling. He'd catch him and then proceed to walk into Mandalay's room, thereby telling her that Koda actually fell and that, well, he hopes he'll be okay. She would nod as she'd say thank you, and then let Izuku, well, she'd tell Izuku Koda's past. Izuku would, well, hang on. How do I phrase this? Izuku would, sorry guys, phone dropped. Izuku would feel sympathy towards Koda, seeing that he had such a rough past. And Izuku would then promise Mandalay that as long as he's here for the time that he's here, he'll try to help Koda out. Mandalay would be extremely happy about this, and she would smile, saying, "Thank you, Izuku." Izuku would then nod as he'd go finish up his bath and then go to bed. The next morning, they would wake up and training would start. And now you're probably wondering, what do you mean training would start? Well, what training will Izuku be doing? Izuku will be learning to manipulate sound on a higher frequency. Well, just learning to manipulate sound better is all that you really need to know. So anyway, Izuku would be using his sound to levitate objects, heavier objects, and even using his sound to penetrate other objects. Meaning, his main job is to go through an object, not destroy said object. This would be heavy training for Izuku, and Class 1B would still arrive, seeing in the heavy training that was going on by Class 1A. So anyway, Izuku and the rest of the class would be going hardcore on their training, and they would actually be, well, physically exhausted by the end of the day. Class 1A would then yet again make some really good food, and they would continue, well, they'd have another bath and head to bed. The third day would come around and the exact same thing would happen. They'd be training. However, this night there was a test of courage. The kids would be going through, except for Izuku, seeing as he doesn't want to do a test of courage. He wants to find out more about Koda. He hadn't seen the boy all day, and he'd been focusing sound waves, low frequency, to bounce back and use as an echolocation signal. He'd found that Koda was high up in the mountain and that there was something else. Something ominous. He'd also sensed a bunch of signatures throughout the entire forest, as he'd quickly let Mandalay know, "Mandalay, there are other people here, and I don't mean pro heroes. I mean, other than us UA students and the Pussycats, Vlad King, and Mr. Aizawa, there are other people." Mandalay would immediately let out a call to all the students, telling them that they need to return back to camp immediately. There are suspicious characters throughout the forest. The kids would immediately turn around and sprint back, which means nobody would be harmed by the villains this time, and Bakugo wouldn't be caught. He'd be with the rest of the students. Izuku would then tell Mandalay that he's gonna go get Koda, and that she should keep the rest of the students safe. Mandalay would contact Aizawa, telling Aizawa that he needs to get those students that he has back to the group immediately, and that they need all the pro heroes there now. Every single pro hero would quickly gather near Mandalay, with Aizawa and Vlad King showing up a little bit later with the rest of the kids. Izuku in this time would have made it up halfway up the mountain using his sound to cover large amounts of distance, which actually surprised him that he could do. He would have made it to the top just in time to see Muscular rounding the corner. He'd then quickly grab Koda as he'd say, "We gotta move, Koda." Koda would look at him angrily saying, "What the hell are you doing here?" And Izuku would then say, "There's a bad man there, Koda. Look." Koda would look and see that it was Muscular, the man who killed his parents. Koda would then yell out, "You bastard! You're the one that killed my parents!" Izuku would look at Muscular as he'd say, "So was you. I don't have time to fight you right now. I need to get this kid to safety." Izuku would then sprint down the mountain with Muscular chasing him all the way. Izuku would use his sound to disorientate Muscular to the best of his abilities while holding somebody. And he would have done pretty well. Muscular would have lost his balance for a bit, and his singular eyesight would have been messed up for a bit. Izuku would have quickly made it back to the rest of the group to see them surrounded by villains. Izuku would then tell everybody, "Cover your ears!" as he would let out a really, really high-pitched frequency that would instantaneously cause all the villains a massive amount of pain in their eardrums. They would all fall to their knees yelling in pain as Muscular would arrive, and he would also be affected. Izuku would then stop as the rest of the heroes would quickly take care of the villains. This time, nobody would get hurt. But this is when out of nowhere the Nomu would charge in, and he'd quickly take out two pro heroes, this being Ragdoll and Pixie Bob. They wouldn't be extremely injured, but they would be hurt nonetheless. Izuku would then quickly use his sound to subdue the Nomu by letting out, a pulse that would constantly reverberate the Nomu's body, stopping it from moving, seeing as he's constantly vibrating its muscles with a sound, meaning that the muscles can't relax and contract. Izuku would then tell Aizawa to call the cops, which Aizawa would do, and the cops would arrive within half an hour. The villains would have done their best to escape, with some of them actually escaping. This being Toga, Mr. Compress, Darby, and I think that's it. No, Spinner too, and twice. They'd end up escaping, but the rest of the villains would have caught. Aizawa would have been pissed that he'd let those villains get away, because flashback to how it happened. Aizawa had just finished getting off of the phone when out of nowhere a massive turret of blue flames was shot at him. He would have been completely and utterly distracted by this, as he would then see that there's two Darbys? What is this? Darby would then smile as the other Darby would release him from the restraints, and it would then turn to Mark. Darby would quickly then raise a wall of pure flame as he'd untie the most important assets, this being Toga, Twice, Compress, and Spinner. He would then go to untie Muscular, but something would stop him. He'd be hit with a massive sonic boom. Not the sonic boom, but the impact of the sonic boom itself. And that would send him hurling back into a tree. He would kind of be pissed at this, but he'd quickly get up. And he'd then say, "I see. So, you're the one causing me so much trouble," is what Izuku would then say. Dabi would then get up smiling, saying, "Well, I got the most important people. We're gonna have to take our leave." Dabi would then disappear with Toga, Twice, Compress, and Kurogiri, leaving Muscular behind. And then let's get back to the present. Nobody would have gotten kidnapped, and there is no rescue arc. But the Nomu would have gotten away as well, but not before Momo had decided to put a tracker on it as well. So anyway, super short part. Not gonna continue this. I personally don't like this series, because the sound quirk is losing oomph for me. So I'm gonna be cutting it. This would be the last part. I doubt most of you would care, but still, last part. I hope you enjoyed. Maybe not the last part. I might just finish it off in the next part, but I hope you enjoyed. And I'm Titan signing out. Peace.